Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So people want to pull up the text on their phones. We're looking at the Book of Assistance by Imam Al-Haddad. If you just Google Book of Assistance PDF, it'll pop up as the first link. We've been going through this text now for some months, alhamdulillah, and just going at it piece by piece. If you've missed any of the previous sessions, you can find them online. You can also find them on our podcast. And what the text does is it provides a framework, a roadmap around spirituality in our tradition. The chapters are very easily digestible. They're not so long. They present in this very concise format a method for its reader to utilize theory, concepts, practice, ritual in ways to get to a destination point of spiritual excellence. And so the chapter that we're on right now is the 5th chapter, which is on regular devotions, awrad, having a daily litany, a wird, right, which the text identifies it as recitation of the Quran, adhkar, prayers, etc. And so what we want to also think about are the relationships between the chapters, right? To not understand information in a religious sense in a way that we conceptualize topics separate from one another, but thinking about how do they connect to each other. You know, like you read Surah Fatiha theoretically 17 times a day in your prayers. What does the meaning of Surah Fatiha have to do with some of the concepts that we're looking at here? Or if you know other chapters of the Quran, right? Likely a lot of us know the smaller chapters. Surah Ikhlas, Surah Kawthar. You know, what does the meaning and message of Surah Kawthar have to do with Surah Ikhlas? How do we take the concepts that we understand and apply them and create connections so that they're not seen separate? And a society that tells us to compartmentalize our identity quite often as people who follow Islam as a religion, we then start to apply that compartmentalization to the study of religion, right? So here is theology, here is fiqh, here is spirituality, here is Quran, here is hadith, here is this, here is that, rather than seeing how do they kind of synergize and inform one another and play a role in connecting us at a deeper level to ourselves and then towards our Creator. Does that make sense? So what I want you to do for just a couple of minutes to get people kind of talking to each other. I know it was a very cold day outside today. At least that was really cold. And I know also we did not meet last week, right? And maybe we didn't meet for 2 weeks or just 1 week. I don't remember. But I know it's definitely 1 week at least. So just for us to kind of get things going. If you haven't been with us, that's fine. There's a table of contents to the book that gives you the chapters. The first chapter is on yaqeen, certitude, like deep kind of faith, committed faith, right? It's a destination point that Imam Al-Haddad sets. The way that you believe that these lights will work when you come into the room is the way that you want to have belief and faith in the divine, right? The way that you can affirm that you go back to wherever you live, there's going to be water that comes out of the faucet. You have reasonable faith in certain things. You want to be able to exercise a similar paralleled sense of conviction in things that stem from religion. This is what yaqeen is, like a certitude in faith. From there he goes into niyyah, intention. You know why you do what you do before you do it. Then he goes into muraqabah. You're essentially looking over your heart, so your heart looks over you. These are all actions of the heart, the first 3 chapters. They're things that you're doing even prior to moving forward, but embedded in the steps that you take. And then he talks about the inner self and the outer self in the 4th chapter. And then this 5th chapter that we're in the middle of, he talks about awrad, having a wird, like a daily litany. What I want you to do is just turn to the persons next to you, ideally in pairs, right? No more than 3, just because we want everybody to speak. And if you're sitting and there's not somebody next to you, just turn around and talk to the persons behind you. What is the connection so far between these 5 topics? Yaqeen, niyyah, muraqabah, the inner and outer self, and awrad, right? Certitude, intention, vigilance of the heart, the inner and the outer self, and having a daily litany, a wird. How do we see connections across all five? Maybe how any of them relate to each other. How does intention relate to a wird? Right? How does yaqeen relate to a wird? And anything that pops up to you, so you can start making those links. We can talk for a few minutes about that just in small groups and pairs. So everybody gets to talk, and then we'll come back and discuss. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay, go for it. Okay, so what are some of the things you're coming up with? What are some of the connections, the ways these concepts relate to each other? What did you talk about? Who wants to start? Yeah.
We talked about how all five of these things are about being, rather than being passive about your faith, it's about being active and mindful about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So instead of just going through the motions, you're setting an intention and you're focusing on the why you're doing what you're doing. And so all five of these things kind of relate to that.
Great. Any other thoughts? Connection. Can we have people, sorry, just if you can move in, because what will happen is people will come to the doors wanting to come in to pray, and they'll think that there's not enough room for them to pray. So if we can scoot in so that we leave kind of a pathway and people can pray in the sides of the room, that would be really great, inshallah. Yeah. What else? What else do we talk about? Yeah.
I kind of saw this, like the few chapters is kind of like this, kind of like an intertwining between like the physical being of a human, like flesh and bone, but like that and being intertwined with like spirituality and faith and like for instance, like when we talk about the heart, like there's the physical heart, then there's the spiritual heart. So I kind of see like these chapters are connected in a way. It's like those two planes are kind of being intertwined with each other. They're not just two separate entities.
Yeah, great. Maybe another way to frame this is, why did he go in this order with the chapters so far? Right? Like, why do you think there's kind of a thread in these steps rather than other things being talked about first? But whatever you discussed is fine too. What else did you talk about? Anybody?
I think these chapters shows like the difference between self-awareness and self-criticism. Because self-awareness helps us to lead to the self-love, like in a way that like we are Allah's creation and Allah created us like physiologically perfect. And self-criticism usually leads to the self-hatred. And self-hatred, it comes from, like, I know it sounds a little weird, but it comes from the ego in a way that when we think about ourselves and our mistakes, we think of like, we compare ourselves to perfection. And the only thing that can be perfect is Allah. So I felt like these chapters were built in a way that that will teach us how to be self-aware and not self-critical of ourselves. I don't know if that was clear or not.
Yeah, it was very clear, right? And all these things you want to think about, they're different topics, and they have very different kind of modes of presentation, but you can distill still a commonality and a thread between them. You know, these types of things are important because when you study something rotely that has mechanics to it, the pursuit can be just about the form and the mechanic. It becomes an ends rather than a means to something, right? So if this is where I study and learn about God, and this is where I learn about mechanics of prayer, and this is learn how to make wudu and all of these things, you're still praying to God when you pray. But for a lot of us, because these past couple of weeks, this chapter on Awrad has been focused on like different things you can do within your wird. And the last time we met, we talked a lot about prayer in itself, right? Like, there's a difference in engaging the prayer ritually and praying the prayer mechanically and praying a prayer that is about just the prayer and its performance versus praying a prayer to God. Do you get what I mean? Right? And it's very easy to perform an act that has mechanics to it and to not then connect that to its foundational purpose which is meant to be a connector to the divine, because these are things that we think about separately or don't think about so much, let alone thinking about how they kind of go together. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? Yeah? Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to kind of just to piggyback on what you just said about kind of what is the order of everything, it's like you look at the certainty of things and you remember what you're certain about, Allah being one and the Prophet ﷺ, being his prophet and messenger, and then that is a reinforcement for your intention. Use that with whatever you do, and then you become vigilant within it. It's a better awareness of yourself and what you're doing, and then you work on your inner self, your outer self, and it can go into your regular devotions. And so, I feel like kind of just like what you said, that's why there's a certain order to it.
Yeah, and you want to think how they build into each other, because it's an easy religion in the sense that it doesn't necessitate quote-unquote knowing so much, right? The bar to entry is not up here to be Muslim. The bar to entry is pretty low because it claims to be a religion for all people of all backgrounds till the end of time. So it doesn't necessitate this kind of idea of being like a super Muslim all the time, that makes us fall into this idea of self-hate and self-deprecation. I'm not good as the person next to me. Do you know what I mean? But where and how you can draw meaning from things at a deeper level, and you can reflect on why Imam Shafi'i would say that, if somebody, all they know of the Quran is Surah Al-Asr, that's all that they know. It suffices for them, right? Surah Ikhlas, our tradition teaches us, is a third of the Quran in its equivalency of its meaning, right? How is that possible? It's not saying memorize the whole book, and I'm not downplaying that, but to be able to take from it, make connections, and to just think deeply about it. And then how do I actualize this based off of what it's trying to teach me? So it's not an identity variable, but it's something that goes a little bit deeper than that, right? It's an entire philosophy on life that I'm kind of adhering to, so to speak. If we go to the text, in the middle of the chapter, we're on page 19 of that first link that comes up, where we were looking at last week the paragraph that says, "Know that the ritual prayer has an outer form and an inner reality. You will not have established the prayer and its outward properties such as correct standing, prostration, tasbih, recitation, bowing, and so forth until you have established both its outer aspect and its reality. As for its outer aspect, this constitutes those obligatory conditions set for it by God, while its reality is that one be present with God, sincerely intend to be purely for His sake, approach Him with complete resolution, and collect one's heart so that one's thought is restricted to the prayer and nothing else, and maintain the courtesies necessary for communing with God. The Prophet has said, sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam, may blessings and peace be upon him, the man in prayer is communing with his Lord, and when the servant rises to his prayer, God turns His face towards him." So for those who were here a couple of weeks ago when we met last, we were talking about the relationship that the outer and the inner has, but to not undermine the mechanics, right? And one of the things that I said to people was between that week and this week, what you want to try to do is start to just honor the timings of the prayer, the hurm al-waqt. There's a sanctity to the times, right? It's not that I pray dhuhr after the time of dhuhr, or asr with dhuhr at maghrib time, but the first step in building a spiritual excellence through the prayer is to adhere to it based off of the criteria that's set forth, because you're yielding to the idea that these are spiritual exercises that have been designated by a creator who knows his creation better than we know ourselves as the best means through which we can engage within a frame of worship towards Him, but for our own betterment, right? And this may or may not have been something that people sought to do, but to just say it again, if you didn't last week, between the last 2 weeks and this week, think about this. You want to between this week and next week, think about it, because this chapter is essentially on recognizing the relationship between self-management and time management. And where and how you can say, I don't have time for something, you're essentially saying that it's not important to me. right? And it doesn't mean that you're saying that in a way that you're indifferent towards it. You might want to do it, but in reality, the thing that's taking precedent with your time is what you're giving more value to, because you're actually doing this. Do you know what I mean? How many of you were here on Jummah on Friday? Oh wow, look at that. So just to repeat what I said there, and for the benefit of those who are not there, like I was in Turkey last week and a half ago doing relief work with the people who are impacted by the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. May Allah grant them ease and make us a means of benefit for them. And amongst the many things that the people in Turkey said to me, and these were people who were Turks, people who were Syrian refugees, people who were Palestinian refugees, Uyghur refugees, people who are on the ground, who lost loved ones, they lost their homes. Like everything is just in rubble. If you were there at Jummah before the khutbah, I showed videos and images of what was going on. You can imagine that people lived through this. It's like you're walking through a war zone. And of the things that they said to me that I should say to others from them is they said, tell people to not waste their time, to value the time that they have. That not any one of us woke up thinking there was going to be this earthquake today, let alone a second one thereafter, let alone the thousands of aftershocks that they've had, and then other earthquakes that happened a week or two later as well. They said, let them know that they should be more serious on how they spend their time and what they put their time into. And you got to think about this from the standpoint of this aspect of this chapter. Fundamentally, your salah is something that you will get out of it what you put into it. You can't treat it like a Sunday school lesson on prayer, nor can you treat it based off of information that you were given also at the age when you were going to Sunday school. At the phase of life that you're in now, your mental capacity and faculties have built themselves in such a way that up until this point, you have been exposed to numerous pedagogies that have taught you how to learn and how to think and to be critical. And you can't not apply that to the maturation of your spiritual self and leave it to something that's simply by chance. And in order for it to get to the deepest point of impact, the paradigm shift around it has to start with an air of vulnerability that goes back to me. How am I going to get out of it what I can when I'm not even doing it the way that it was intended to be done? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Where I haven't like sat down and thought about it. And this was the second thing that I asked people to do that we'll reiterate now, and maybe next week we'll come back to, just because there was a gap in between. Between this week and next week, you want to try your best to just honor the windows of times of the prayer. It doesn't mean that the minute it starts, you pray it, right? I sat with somebody the other day, and they were like flustered out of their mind because somebody had said to them very irresponsibly that the best thing you can do is pray your prayer right when it starts, meaning that that's the only time you can pray. And this person's like, how can I be a student and build a routine where every day this thing changes by minutes and I have to somehow pray it in that way? And I was like, no, man, like you got 3 hours to pray Dhuhr, right? And she looked at me and she like knocked her head and she was like, are you kidding me? And she was like, man, if I see that person who told me this thing, right? You might think you sound like you're saying something that means something, but in reality, as to connect to the person that you're talking to, there's windows of time to pray. And you want to honor those windows of time. They have to be performed in that time window. Unless there are circumstances that are extenuating. You're traveling, there's different rules. You're in a place where there's fundamental danger to you, right? There's different things that come up in those senses, but for most of us, that's not the norm. This was the first thing, just as a reminder, between this week and next week. Just pay attention to it. Not in a way that you're like, just you're reflecting. What's getting in the way? How did I spend my night before that is making it hard for me to get up for Fajr? How am I dealing with like emotional challenges, right? The inner and outer self is not just your spiritual heart and nafs and ruh. You have your memories, you have your feelings, you have your experiences. They're all in you. How does the heaviness of argumentation, irreconciled emotions, challenges in life, stress, make it hard to get up out of your bed? How are those things impacting? So you're thinking about the obstacles just to get to a place where you don't have a prayer in the day, that you don't have at a minimum at least an hour to perform it. Do you know what I mean? And it takes like a minute to pray your prayers, literally, right? How in the course of an hour minimum to upwards, like Isha till Fajr time is like huge in terms of the hours, right? How is it that in that entire window, what's getting in the way? And then the second thing that we had said was, you look through like the Quran and the Hadith, and you read, like, what does it tell you is the point of this thing in the first place? What is like the prayer supposed to yield for you? What does it tell you through these texts, like its meaning is, its purpose is? So there's not just kind of like ambiguity to a relationship, or like, I'm just praying because my parents are going to throw a shoe at me if I don't, right? Or, you know, I do it because everybody else around me does it, or I don't do it because it's easier to forego. But I never built a relationship with what the text says is the point of it. I only know it in this frame of obligation, and that just creates more burdensomeness to it. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to it being something that's like liberating and something that gives me a certain sweetness. Does that make sense? So those two things you want to spend some time just thinking about and looking at. So when we come back next week, I'm going to be like, so what did you read in the Quran when it tells you about Salah? What does it say? And again, I'm not knocking anybody. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. Do not let shaitan have victory over you because you start to inculcate self-doubt as the intention. This is why intention is chapter 2. You bring yourself with positive intentionality, right? You're in a space where now is not about why did I not do X, Y, or Z before. Just get it done in front of you in the days you have ahead of you, right? You honor the living by also honoring the deceased, these people miles away who said, tell them, don't waste their time. So you open up the book. What does it say? When I ask you next week, I want you to say to me, you know, I found this verse in this chapter, and it said, this is what Salah is about. Here's this hadith that I read that said this thing about Salah, right? The Prophet ﷺ is saying to Bilal, arahna biha, that bring us like relief through the adhan, O Bilal. Like, why is it a relief to him, you know? And how is he hearing it? And I'm surrounded by people talking during the adhan. Or why do I never even go to a place where the adhan is called, right? You start to think deeply about it in this way, that if it's a source of relaxation for him, like, what am I depriving myself of? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay, so let's go back and look at this. So as he continues on, can somebody read that paragraph again, where starting in the middle it says, as for its outer aspect? The paragraph that starts, know that the ritual prayer has an outer form and an inner reality. So just starting from the middle of it, as for its outer aspect. Yeah, go ahead.
As for its outer aspect, this constitutes those obligatory conditions set forth by God, while the reality is that one be present with God, sincerely and committed to for his sake, approaching with complete resolution, and collect one's heart so that one's thought is restricted to the prayer and nothing else, and maintain the qualities necessary for union with God.
Okay, so what does this mean now when he says, Approach him with complete resolution and collect one's heart so that one's thought is restricted to the prayer and nothing else. What does that mean? What does it mean to you? What does it sound like? Yeah.
Means like if you're doing something before the prayer, like I don't know, studying or watching something on TV, you have to like not go straight into prayer while thinking about that thing that you were doing because it distracts you while you're praying. So before you pray, you have to like set yourself, make niyyah that you're gonna make salah, and like collect your heart as in and collect your thoughts to just focus on that one thing, your relationship with God and that prayer, so that you get the best out of it.
So how do you do that? Yeah.
Not rushing your prayers, so when you're praying, you don't think about how you have to get to this next place very quickly.
But how do you do that? Like, how do you get to that place where it's like that? Does that make sense? Yeah. Or what are things that make that easier?
Having like a buffer between what you're doing and your prayer. So like, even if it's like 5 or 10 minutes, just taking the time to be like, okay, I'm gonna go, like just not doing anything, taking a break from that, and then instead of just like dropping what you're doing and then going straight into prayer, have like that buffer time in between.
Yeah.
This is something my old teacher told me, but he said to basically kind of like meditate while you're praying namaz, but like in between every rakat, try to take a deep breath in and a deep breath out, and that way you're kind of resetting yourself for the prayer.
Yeah, great. Let's take a different frame to it. What causes you to not be focused in prayer? Think about it in terms of the things we've talked about already, right? Inner self, outer self, muraqabah, niyyah, these kinds of things. What are things that get in the way from focus? It can be anything. It's not a trick question, right? What are some of the things that come up that make it hard to focus? Yeah.
I think stress and worry. So mentally reminding yourself that whatever you're worrying about is in the hands of Allah.
Okay, so stress and worry. Great. What else? Yeah.
Lack of presence.
A lack of presence. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
For example, like if the TV is on, like turn it off, like when you're going to pray.
Yeah, right? So let's focus on things like that for a second. Part of this is going to be about the atmosphere in which you're engaging it. Do you know what I mean? Right? Like, I had a friend of mine who used to live with me before I got married, and it was Maghrib time, and we were watching the finals, the NBA, and he had the TV on. If any of you have been in my apartment before, the television, you know, is kind of in the direction of the Qibla, right? And for those of you who have not been over, come over soon, please. To me, right, accessibility is important. My teachers taught me that a healthy community is one that knows where their imam lives. It's not supposed to be separate. We're supposed to have kind of connectivity in that sense. And my friend, you know, is like, okay. And then he like mutes the TV but doesn't turn it off. And I'm like, what are you doing, man? He's like, nothing, we can't hear it. I'm like, bro, we're praying to the television right now. You know what I mean? Right? Like, you know. But that's like a problem. When you have hadith that say there's no prayer when food is served, it doesn't mean that you don't pray because there's food on the table, but you've created the distraction. Right? If you don't want to redo wudu, which a lot of you will not make your wudu again. Do you know what I mean? You'll sit in a place where you will push yourself to a distracted mind because you're not wanting to redo wudu. Right? Same idea as food. The hadith, you gotta go to the bathroom, and you're in a place now where you line up, it's ready to pray, and you're like, man, I hope this is a short prayer. And then the imam starts reading like Surah Baqarah, and you got everything clenched because you want nothing to you know what I mean. But then that's telling you what you're valuing your prayer to be fundamentally, right? You literally have televisions that you can pause a show in the middle of. You can record everything. Commercials go the duration of what would be the extent of praying 3 rak'ahs to begin with. You get what I'm saying? But the idea from this principally is that there's already so much that distracts us. Worry, anxiety, stress. On top of that, why are you not controlling what you have control over that's outward of you? So for the wird to be something that's effective, for the prayer to be something that's effective, it's got to be something that you also, when possible, have control over the atmosphere that's around you. It's got to be a place of stillness, and you bring strategy to that. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I want you to think, where do you pray in the course of your days? And what are spots that you have that you have designated as actual spaces for your stillness and reflection? And sometimes it's really hard, right? You're in the middle of things, you got to find stuff. I teach in our public policy school here, and one of my classes is like 3 hours long. It's like the worst thing in the world. You know what I mean, right? No offense to people who are in my class, but we're not in class right now, right? And there's times in the calendar year when I'm teaching this class, and there's prayers that take place in the middle of it. So I don't get to just walk to a prayer room down the hall, but I got to find an empty classroom. I got to find some place, I walk in, and all these like awkward white people, like, I'm so sorry. And I can't talk back to them because I'm praying, right? But like fundamentally, it's not easy. Every single prayer is not going to have overt focus to it. And there's hadith that tell us this, that people are going to pray their prayer, and of it, their presence, the acceptance of it, is going to be like a fraction of it, the hadith says. It's not from a lack of trying, though. Do you know what I mean? Because fundamentally, I have to pray my prayer in its time. There is sanctity to the time, and there is obligation to the time. So a condition of obligation is not khushur. You don't have to have focus for the prayer to be complete. You get it done, right? And you have other things that'll come in the way as well sometimes. You don't have control over. If you're going to try to pray in the middle of a protest, then that's not a problem. Go to the protest. You got to still pray your prayer. If you are going shopping and Maghrib is 1 hour long and the sun is setting, and you go and you pray in a empty dressing room in the middle of Times Square, then that's what you're doing. You got to still pray the prayer. The variables that are going to create an absence of focus are things, though, that exist outwardly that you can have strategy around. Do you get what I mean? So if during the day you got 2 or 3 that are situated in a society that is not based on your religion, most things are not in accordance with our ethics and values, right? You turn on any TV, you're not watching something that's based in Islamic ethics and values. The structures are not based on Islam. The conduciveness to Islam in a schedule is not what routines are based off of. So you just got to try your best, but you actually have to try your best, which doesn't mean that you don't try at all. And then to balance that out, where you can still have strategy around it in those times that are a little bit more hectic, and then think out beyond those, the times that are not hectic, where you're bringing presence and focus to the environment around you. Do you get what I mean? I want you to think for a minute, in your own routine, daily, weekly, even monthly, where are places that you go that are just places of stillness? Places that you can go to focus, that you can have reflection. What are the things that you do that allow for your mind to be present and for your heart to be present? It is not that khushua, focus, a presence of the heart, denies the environment around you and you're suddenly zoned out and can't hear anything. That's not what it is. You have to know what it is by knowing what it's not. Do you know what I mean? Because if you are taught to be the imam of a prayer, they teach you to listen to sounds. The Prophet shortened his prayer when he hears the baby crying. He doesn't want difficulty for the mother. How can he hear the child crying if he can't hear anything when he is focused in his prayer? Does that make sense? When you make a mistake in the recitation, you listen to the persons behind you to fix the recitation. If you move in a wrong movement, you're supposed to stay seated and you stand, then you hear the people behind you say Subhanallah to give you an indication you made a mistake. All of it requires being in a place where you can hear what's taking place around you. Focus cannot be contingent just on that type of simplistic understanding of what an environment is. You are in New York City. You know what I mean? My babies are New Yorkers. My daughter was born in Brooklyn. My son is born in Midtown. They've lived in an apartment their entire lives. When we go out to like random countryside places, right? They are used to hearing traffic and noise and all kinds of things outside. Do you get what I mean? Right? It is about you having control over your inner self by assessing how are you controlling your outer self. Do you get what I'm saying? So step number one, you got to treat your prayer seriously enough that you actually are mindful and strategic about the places that you're praying your prayers. And you're going to get out of it what you put into it. So if you just roll out of bed and you pray on the side of your bed after throwing wudu on your face and that's it, then that's it, right? If you're always surrounded by hecticness and anxiety and chaos, and at this point in life, there's not a place that you know you can go that you haven't established for yourself that's just like a place of stillness, then why wouldn't there be distractions just building up? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? What else disrupts focus? So the environment, the space is important. What else gets in the way? Yeah.
Your inner thoughts. So I think like a lot of the time you're reciting something Fatha or whatever, you're thinking about something completely different. Oh, I have to revise for this quiz. I have to do this, I have to do that. You're planning out your day while you're praying. That's not how it should be, but it happens to a lot of us. So I think you should focus on like what you're saying and like know the meaning and try to block out these thoughts. But you're gonna get them, like it's your nafs or shaitan or whatever. So it happens a lot.
So this statement of that's not how it should be is also an important thing to think about, because this is how most of you talk to yourselves. You have a challenge that is already stressful and anxiety inducing, and then on top of that, the rhetoric of self-talk is very negative. I'm having this struggle and it's compounded with more anxiety because I shouldn't be having the struggle. That then creates other thoughts that stem from it that say there's something wrong with me, like I should be in a different place, right? But based off of what? Do you know what I mean? You have to have a level of self-compassion in order to be able to navigate obstacles and hurdles that come in your way. If you're running on empty constantly, exhaustion, religion that's supposed to be an outlet becomes more of a source of anxiety than anything else at times. There's not people to go and talk to about what you feel and explore your thoughts and self-express, let alone in irreligious spaces, like religious spaces don't offer that as much as they could be. Do you know what I mean? And may Allah make us people who are a source of healing for His creation and allow for us to find the healing that we're in need of, right? You are not suddenly muted in everything that you are when you stand for prayer. And if you don't have a place where you exert engagement with your thoughts outside of your prayer, the prayer is going to still do what it's intended to do. So when you bring yourself to a place of stillness for a moment, and the rest of the day is spent with you not engaged in just deliberate stillness, your body is not stopped, and you haven't tried to focus on something, then why wouldn't your thoughts just suddenly start to pour into a place? Because when else do you have a place where you actually engage them or pay attention to them? Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? So you're bringing yourself in your entirety to this. The thoughts that usually pop up in the course of your head while you're in this state are usually not unimportant thoughts. You know, you're not like looking at the place of sajda and you're like, man, like my toes look really weird right now, you know? Or like that guy next to me, I wish he would just stop tickling my foot with his foot. You know what I mean? But it's usually like, yeah, I do have a quiz. Or it's usually, you know, I am fighting with my brother. You know, this like degree is very hard. It's really difficult with my family. It's really tough, like being single. You know, all of these different things like come up because the thoughts have not been addressed accurately outside of the course of the prayer. And the prayer, one of its purposes is to be a source of self-transformation. And so even within the idea of your thoughts coming up, Allah is giving you still an act of mercy because He's telling you what's going on inside of you and what's controlling you and what it is that's taking precedent over your vision and perspective. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? How do you start to reclaim control over your thoughts? Because everybody thinks, right? Right now, all of you are thinking something. None of you are in a place where you're not thinking something. What this religion is about is being able to now reharness and reclaim the ability to choose what you think about and how you think about those things that you're thinking about. To have positive frames, shift the paradigm, and to have consciousness and awareness when you're moving through things, right? So how do you do that? How do you get to a place where you are in control of the thoughts? Because somebody's got to be thinking the thoughts, right? They're not just thinking themselves on their own. So you're bigger than the thoughts. Just like you're bigger than any one of your feelings. So how do you get to a place where you reclaim the ability to do this? Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? Yeah. I'd love for you to turn to the persons next to you and just talk this question out, because it's important, right? What do we do to reclaim that ability to focus and deal with some of these thoughts that are there? And then we'll come back and discuss. Go ahead. Okay. So, what are some of the things that are coming up? How do you reclaim control of your thoughts? Or what you were discussing. Who would like to start? What are some of the things? Yeah.
So I'd say like reflections really do help, like writing what happened through your day, or maybe this conversation irritated you. Like while you're writing, you figure out like what is the root cause for that. So sometimes like reflections do really help.
Great. Reflections. Yeah. Yeah.
I think the easiest one, like since Islam is like the easy religion, is like what do we do before prayer? Make wudu. And I mean, I've been coming to your Wednesday classes, and I remember you mentioned how to be present during wudu. So I feel like we can reclaim our thoughts and our hearts while we make wudu, while we purify ourselves, or like ask ourselves while we make wudu, oh, like why we're doing this like 3 times? Like I don't know. Like I never asked that question until you mentioned it recently. So it's like every time now I make wudu, like I kind of remind myself, oh, this is like I'm like washing away all the sins that I committed, like, you know. And I feel like it I'm sorry, it shows like mindfulness, and yeah, I don't know.
Great.
I'd be wrong.
Yeah.
I love that, and I kind of adding to Mada's point earlier is like incorporating the actual like changes in positioning of salah as like a way to reorient. So like every time like you say Allahu Akbar, like it's natural for us to have these thoughts that may be coming or going, or feelings that are coming and going, but like every time you say Allahu Akbar, it's like Allah is greater than this thought that I'm currently having, and like let me reorient back into this. And then something that Nazi said that was really nice was you know, I think it's like so natural for us to kind of get into this routine of praying, and sometimes like you say salams and you're like, what surah did I even say? Like I don't even remember, like it kind of just like went by as a blur. But to try to recite out loud if you can, and I think that kind of forces you to be more present with each letter of the surah and also of the whole prayer altogether.
Yeah, great. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
So what I think is like before going to pray, like I like to do like wudu, even if I have the wudu, like just like you know, this is what I do before I pray. Like I'm going to pray, I mean, like not think of anything else. Like no matter what's going on, I'm gonna pray, and then I'll think about this after. Like and put everything aside on the side, and I'm going to pray.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've entered this phase, and probably many of you have, but I just like to distract myself to not think about my thoughts. And sometimes we're troubled with maybe harder thoughts that you don't want to relive or whatnot. So I think really allowing yourself the spaces to like sit still and actually combat what we're feeling, what we're thinking. Whether that's in therapy, meditation, or like you said, finding a space. But in that way, then you're like already reflecting in that moment versus in the actual prayer itself. And I don't know if anyone's watched Sound of Metal by Riz Ahmed, but it's like there's this one scene where his mentor is like, just sit and write and just don't do anything else. Don't distract yourself. And it's this idea of just like being comfortable with silence and being comfortable with your own thoughts. And then the second thing was knowing exactly what you're saying when you're praying. So it's like, Subhanallah, I'm gonna mess it up, but Subhana Rabbi Alamin or whatever it is. But I think one of them was like, glory be to exalted, or like, you know, Rabbana wa lakal hamd, understanding what that actually means, so that when you're praying, you know that you're actually calling to God, or you're calling to whatever the meaning is.
Amazing. What are moments when you feel like you are least in control of what's going on in your head or in your heart? Right? Because the whole idea with this is prayer is supposed to be transformational. You know what I mean? And it's not like a physical exercise. It's a spiritual exercise. So the idea is that it's transformational of your inner self, right? And where and how it's meant to be transformation of your inner self. Fundamentally, like, if you don't know what you're carrying in your heart, it doesn't mean that it's not there. There's certain things that don't need us to have attentiveness towards them for them to still be present and be true and have validity to them. But you also learn about yourself through yourself. You know what I mean? So for example, like, why would you have presence in your prayer if you have terrible sleeping habits, right? If you only sleep like a couple hours a night, every night, or you wake up for Fajr after you went to bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, like staying awake, doing all kinds of random stuff, like, why would Fajr be something that, like, you have wakefulness? Do you get what I'm saying? And sometimes, and it's not like a bad thing, right? When I went to Turkey, I didn't sleep at all, you know? Like, we were there for a purpose. And when I came home, like, my sleep was just very off. You know, I like totally off. I still woke up to pray because I had to pray my prayers. But I remember like the second day or the first day I was back. So I landed in an evening time and I woke up to pray Fajr. And I typically stay up after Fajr time. But I just couldn't. Like, I prayed my prayers and I fell back asleep. And I had fallen asleep at like 9 something the night before after I prayed Isha. And I prayed Fajr, I don't even know, like similar to what Zenith was saying. If you asked me like what I prayed in the surah, I couldn't tell you. And I slept till 3 in the afternoon. And I only woke up at 3 because I had to pray Dhuhr. And then I was like, if I don't stay up, I'm going to be awake at like 9 o'clock at night. And that's just a random time to start your day, right? So I forced myself to stay awake. And there's other things going on, right? But in my head, I'm now thinking. Other people that were traveling with me, they're like popping melatonin and other stuff. And I never had to do this. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or in COVID, a lot of my travel disrupted. And my habits around like flying and what that did in terms of recovery changed. But fundamentally, like, the sleeplessness of my travel impacting my sleep and jet lag while I've been here. A lot of you were like seeing me as I was walking around and saying to me very kindly, like, man, you look so exhausted, terrible. I'm like, thanks, guys. That makes me feel great about myself. But it was true. All of that, nobody's going to say to me, like, oh man, maybe you shouldn't have gone to Turkey, right? That's not the point of it. The point is, the state of my sleep impacted my presence in my prayer. Do you get what I mean? Right? It's going to impact yours also. You see? The food that you're eating, the food that you're not eating, these things that you consume, they will bear presence on your ability to be focused, right? If right now, for example, you don't start detoxing yourself off of whatever it is that you're addicted to, Ramadan's going to be painful in the first couple of weeks, right? That's not it. That's just you making a decision. Why would you not start weaning yourself off of it? Do you want to have a terrible headache for the first week of Ramadan, and then with that headache you're going to pray because you didn't stop drinking caffeine on overload right now? Nobody's telling you not to drink it always. I'm saying if you want the focus in your prayer, right, why would you not ready yourself for those moments right now? Do you get what I mean? You want to have the ability to stand in the nighttime to pray in Ramadan, right? May Allah bless us to reach it and benefit from it, and make us those who witness and benefit from Laylatul Qadr. Like, you got to bring strategy into it. You know what I mean? I didn't sit in my house when I'm like half like drool coming out of my mouth. My son's like, Baba, are you okay? I'm like, Kareem, I got to pray, right? You know, I'm not sitting there hating on myself, but I'm like, I got to figure this out because I'm going for Umrah in 2 weeks, inshallah. And I'm going to come back, and my jet lag that wasn't even fully recovered is going to get worse. And when I'm back here, I got to wake up to still pray the next morning. So there's got to be a plan around it. Do you get what I mean? Right? You have to learn about yourself through yourself. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense, like some of the little things that then create bigger problems. Do you know? Does that make sense? Does it? So your consumption of things is going to disrupt your focus. You're bringing yourself in your entirety, right? Exercise is not just about your physical wellness, but your spiritual wellness is going to be intrinsically linked to your physical wellness. So you got to get up and move around sometimes. Don't exercise for vanity. You are beautiful because Allah made you beautiful. You don't have to fit into somebody else's superficial understanding of beauty. You're much bigger than that. And you have to have a sense of internal recognition of who you are. But you got to get up and stretch and exercise and do things. I saw Khalid the other day, right? I don't know how old he is now at this point in time, mashallah. But my man, before we were praying, he was doing like butterfly stretches. He could put his head to the ground and all kinds of things. And I'm like, what is going on here? Do you know what I mean? That doesn't happen because when you are after like 8 years old and you're just naturally flexible, that it just is on its own accord, right? But you got to plan in advance in these ways too. So you get your body moving. You've been sitting at a desk all day, like crunching numbers, surrounded by people who have different ethics from you. They come off of a weekend where they're talking to you about things you can't relate to. Everything revolves around alcohol and sex and the hypersexualization of society. People are telling you like random things. You're in a classroom and you're constantly the only person of your background in the space, and it's just stress and stress and stress. If you read this book that's called The Body Keeps the Score, it talks to you about your trauma lives in your body. And if you don't address it, like it's still like there with you. I used to go to get acupuncture done. My acupuncturist was massaging like knots in my neck because I carry a lot of people's trauma. And I have this like crazy habit where I can sleep through anything. I went to the dentist the other day and they were drilling my mouth, and I swear to Allah, I fell asleep on the chair, right? I don't even know. Now I'm getting like alarmed by it. Like where and how I can fall asleep, where I fall asleep. Do you know what I mean? And so I'm at the acupuncturist, and this guy's like sticking needles in my neck, and he's got this waterfall like playing in the background. He dims the lights, And then he finds this crazy knot in the left part of my neck, and he's like breaking it, like breaking it down. And I'm in this half sleep state with everything going on, and all of a sudden I start to like visually and in other sensory ways experience a story of a woman in our community who told me she is like a survivor of abuse. And I called some of my friends who are religious scholars, and I was like, hey man, I don't know what the hell just happened to me, right? And they were like, yeah, like that sounds like it makes sense. But you're literally like holding your own trauma and people's trauma in your body. It's gonna show up. And your physical wellness routine is important in being able to release some of these things. Having people you can talk to, that you just open up to, that aren't solution oriented, who are constantly saying, well, why don't you do this or why don't you do that? They're just giving you a space to self-express so they can hold some of what you're holding so that you don't have to carry it all on your own, right? All of these things are going to impact like the presence in that rak'ah. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? You have to understand you're not a bad person. Like a society that has told you your self-worth is based off of degrees and credentials and all this kind of stuff, then is going to inflate the importance of a quiz, because it has nothing to do with the quiz. Your core belief structure is built around the fact that I'm not good unless I do well on this thing. Do you get what I mean? Does that make sense? All these things then start to play into each other. What you eat for breakfast is going to play a role in how you're able to function at dhuhr time, right? The conversations you have, the things that you consume, what you are visually seeing also is really important. Lowering your gaze is not just about this like reductive, simplistic approach to gender relations, right? But lowering your gaze also has a mindfulness that as a generation, we consume more visually in like weeks than people did for entire years of their life. The minute you walk from your home, you are now bombarded by a marketing strategy that seeks to take all of your attentiveness as much as it can. Ads are at every single place. You can't walk down the street and there's not ads on everything. Cabs have ads, billboards have ads, your headphones are playing ads in your ears, all kinds of things. Your phone is scrolling with ads, and you are visually consuming so much. And all of that imagery is now planting itself in parts of your consciousness. And it's going to come up in different ways, directly or indirectly. So lowering your gaze sometimes means just like cut off the sensationalization of like visual consumption and shut your eyes sometimes and like relax and allow for yourself to be in a place where you're not binging in that form of consumption. You get what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? The exhaustion piece is going to be most critical. Your self-care outside of the prayer is going to impact the presence in the prayer. And you want to see yourself as an entire being. And then the beautiful part, man, when you have a hadith like Imam Al-Haddad is saying to you here, that you're communing with your Lord in the prayer. Allah knows you better than you know yourself. And that's why you can't simply pray, but you have to pray to God. Because then you get an understanding that the one that you're praying to, who's not just watching you, but watching over you, knows what it is that you're going through. Understands the difficulties, the stresses, the challenges, the anxieties, and is only looking for you to try your best, which is not going to be the best of the person next to you, because the person next to you does not walk in your shoes. The person behind you, they don't go through what you go through. It's not about loneliness, but your God hears every prayer that is uttered to him, including your individual prayer, and that doesn't have to then say, my reality somehow becomes dismissive, right? There's people in our community, man, they're the only Muslims in their families. They hide their Islam from their families. May Allah make it easy for them. Their families will not accept them as Muslims. What do you think it's like for them when they're trying to pray in their rooms, door locked, everything is just muffled, and they're just doing their best? What kind of attentiveness and focus is there? This is why you gotta love for people what you love for yourself. It's the condition of Iman. Because if that's not your reality, but you have real mahabbah for people and what they go through, why would you be lazy in your salah? Just out of respect for those who would kill to be able to have a family full of Muslims, or have a blessed space where they could sit and pray at their choosing. Do you get what I mean? Right? And you gotta think deeply about these things and allow for it to be something that resonates. What I would suggest between this week and next week, in addition to some of what we talked about before, just pay attention to the distractions. What comes up? And you don't want to get to a place where there's a sense that the thoughts themselves are problematic. It's not about being devoid of reality. Islam is about reality. Do you know what I mean? If you have pervasive thoughts that pop up in your prayer, then bring them to the du'as that you're making to Allah, right? Ya Allah, this thing that popped up in the first rak'ah of my prayer, right? This quiz that I have, help me through it. Because that same anxiety is now going to be the thing that gets you from being able to sit for a minute after the prayer is done and to make the dua or to find stillness in a more elevated state celestially. Do you see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? You got to also unlearn some of the things that you learned around some of these things and bring to your prayer a recognition of where it has importance and value to you. And here, Imam Al-Haddad is saying this in terms of the relation of the outward and the inward. There were some scholars in our tradition who said khushu' was an integral component to the prayer. If you did not have it, the prayer was not accepted. It wasn't complete. And there's others who said no, it's not. You don't need to have that focus in the course of your prayer for the prayer to be considered valid and complete. But you don't want to add to the distractions by doing other things, right? If you have to go to the bathroom and redo your wudu. You know what I mean? If you are going to put something in a stove and turn it on and then try to go pray and then jump back to take something off of the stove because it's burning, then wait till you're done praying before you start putting something onto a stove. You get what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Right? And it's little things that are going to add up, because if you deal with the smaller distractions, the bigger difficulties are going to then be able to be addressed a little bit differently. Okay, so we're going to take a pause here. We'll pray Isha for those who haven't prayed. The rest of the week we're going to continue with just our regular halaqas. I don't think there's any, on Saturday, we're going to do a converts brunch in my apartment. So for those who are converts, those who are exploring Islam, or you're a family member of a convert, exploring Islam as a non-Muslim, right? It's a space we build for our convert community. You should definitely come and check that out, or if you have friends who fit into those categories. We are going to put out a call for volunteers for Ramadan. Ramadan is less than a month away, subhanAllah. You want to start getting ready for it from now, right? And not just treat it as something that is kind of secondary to what you have to do. It's a time where you will definitively have change, and you want to have change that is sustainable change, right? So start thinking from right now. You know what I mean? What is my eating? What is my sleeping? You're living in a routine that is distinct from what might be ideal, but it can't be, again, from a lack of trying, you know? So everybody else is out doing something till 2 a.m. Go to bed early so that you have strength and energy that you need, right? Start trying to fast in some of these days. We have iftar on Mondays and Thursdays. Some of you have already started fasting. And I talked to some of you, right? Even today, somebody said to me, today was the first time I fasted, in a long time. I was like, how was it? He was like, it was hard, man. I was like, good. Better for it to be hard on this day than on the first day of Ramadan. And you get used to the physicality of it, and your body adjusts physiologically to it, so that now it's not like what most people go through, which is the first week is, man, I gotta like get used to not having coffee 3 times a day. And I would say you wean yourself off of it as best as you can. I was sitting with somebody the other day, with my kids, right, with some of their friends. And one of these kids, my kids are 7 and 10. There's a kid sitting with them who was like down in cups of coffee. And I was like, what is wrong with you, man? I'm not a very judgmental person, but I was like, man, somebody needs to sit down, your parents, right? Because what do you got? He's like, I can't wake up without my cup of coffee. I'm like, bro, what are you talking about? And my son, afterwards, he was like, Baba, like, should I drink coffee? And I'm like, no, Korean man, drink water. She said, that's all you need, right? Wean yourself from it, you know? Like, you still got a good amount of time. I'm saying it with love. Don't be stupid, right? Why would you wait till the first night of Ramadan to let this be something that catches up to you? Do you get what I mean? Right? You start practicing it now and augmenting your routine and your schedule, sleep-wise, otherwise. We're going to need a lot of volunteers, inshallah. So when you get the forms through our email list, sign up. We're anticipating here there's going to be like 700 to 1,000 people a night coming to break fast, praying with us. You know, may Allah accept it from us. At our engineering school, we'll have it there Monday to Friday, and our dental school Monday to Thursday. Those are mostly like our student communities there that go there. The main space is here. And we'll be doing a lot of charity fundraising again, like we normally do, alhamdulillah. Last year, I think we raised $3 or $4 million to assist people in need in various causes. And inshallah, we'll raise a similar amount this year as well. But that'll also need your help, so please look out for that. When you look at those campaigns online, they're like 30, 40,000 people donating to them, you know? So it's not one person writing $1 million check, but it's, you know, thousands of people giving $1, $5, $10, $100. You need everybody's help to kind of circulate those things. Is there any other announcements that anybody wants to make before we wrap up? Yes, no? Okay, so what I'd like for you to do, just before we close, you turn again to the person next to you. What are some of the things you're taking away from tonight? Some of the things that are like sticking out for you? And then we'll discuss that and then close up. So you can just turn to the people around you and do that for a minute. Okay, so what are some of the things we're taking away from tonight, just as we wrap up? Anything that sticks out? Anything you're taking away?
Get off your phone and sleep early.
Get off your phone and sleep early. Yeah, great. What else? Yeah.
I guess one thought I have is that, like, when you say like wean some of these things you have, like for instance with caffeine before Ramadan, I guess Ramadan kind of teaches us what we do on a daily basis that actually end up becoming like a habit, that when you finally deprive yourself of it, you now realize that you have withdrawal symptoms. In a way, it could become a form of addiction. I was telling them about on Ramadan I don't drink coffee anymore. Like the first week I usually have really bad headaches, so, and I don't drink coffee after I break my fast because I'm gonna be up more, you know. So I last Ramadan I had like halfway through the month I did not touch any caffeine. Everything I was good. And then my family had a dinner, and my dad always drinks espresso whenever he breaks his fast. My mom made an extra one. She asked me, do you want it? I'm like, no, I can't drink. She goes, oh, I made an extra one. And I go, okay, fine, I'll take it. And I didn't sleep until like 5 o'clock in the morning.
Oh my God.
Because I realized that like my body was just so deprived of it. So when it was finally reintroduced to my body, you realize the power of what you take every day without realizing.
Yeah, subhanAllah. It's crazy. Yeah, and it's like, what do you do with that information, right? Like, self-awareness isn't about like, oh, that's interesting, but then like you do something with that knowledge, right? You allow for yourself to like engage in some kind of development through it. Yeah.
Okay, so I was thinking about, like, earlier when we were talking about how Salah is communion with Allah. And one of the things that I went through, and maybe some people can relate to what I'm saying, is that like sometimes we get lost in these cycles of, you know, self-help and self-awareness and therapy and trauma and the body keeps score and all that stuff. And I feel like we
as Muslims have a law to go back to, and sometimes we even, not by intention, but we take them out of the equation. So we separate Salah from all the other stuff we do. And I know you touched upon this before, but I think what really, really helps is also like putting that in your dua and just being like, I don't know what to do, but Allah, can you please help me? And I think doing that with a sincere intention of going to God and seeking help through Salah, like wasta'inu bis-sabri was-salah, like seek help through patience and prayer, and using that as a tool will also kind of correlate to all of the other things we're trying to supplement. And I'm just saying that because that's what I used to, like I used to try to do both, or I used to separate the two, but once I started really understanding, you know, how loving Allah is and how like talking to Him as that, you know, loving friend and communion really helps with all the other stuff, it just made it everything a lot more smooth.
Amazing. Yeah.
I think in the last couple of classes that I've been attending, one of the struggles that I was struggling with was reading the Quran daily. Like, years passed by, and like it was an intention I would make every day, like, okay, I'm gonna read some Quran or at least an ayah, and it was just something so hard for me. And then, you know, attending these classes and kind of reflecting back on like multiple Mondays that we were sitting down with you, kind of sitting down and reflecting what are the things we can take out. And I've been trying to apply that, and there's so much more time to actually read the Quran. When I was first trying to at least read some, it was very tough, it wasn't easy, but then I realized it is, like, it goes so fast. Like, you can read the Quran, like one juz in an hour, maybe 45 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes. It's so much easier. And I was like, why did I put this off for 6 years? Right? Just waking up and realizing like all I had to do is say some no's to some friends or switch, like make sure that when I wake up, do this first and just read, at least start reading somewhere. And then when I feel tired or feel like this is too much, maybe I can stop and open it again. But just now I can't start my day without doing that, right? Even if it's one ayah or two ayah. But I went 6 years without doing that. And it's so easy that sometimes and I grew up reading Quran every day because we had a Qari Sahib, right? So it was part of our like 14 years since we were 3 to 14 to 15 to read Quran every day, and then it just disappeared once you get into your adult life. But now I'm realizing like so many years can pass by, and so just saying no and kind of adjusting a few things here and there, and just taking 30 minutes out can like honestly like change your life to like, you know, so thank you for all these classes.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Anyone else? Yeah.
I was gonna say, you said it was a good like quote that you said, I guess, was take control of what you can, and that can even attest to like what she said and what a lot of people are saying now. Even like I'm not trying to drink espresso, and espresso's pretty good too, so yeah. That's difficult. But you know, like doing things like that is trying to establish an environment, not even just for Salah, but for everything. We had a discussion, like he was just talking about like trying to have the kind of the best group of friends that can kind of bring you closer like to Islam and Allah, like so. Having that all together is just like very important to have a good foundation for yourself and in all aspects, especially with Salah.
Yeah, mashallah. Other thoughts, anything before we wrap up? And the idea with all of this is like there's going to be kind of tension as you bring change. It's not just always immediate. Just be reasonable with yourself. And then as it becomes habitual, you start to feel kind of the impact of these things with the regularity of it. So you make small changes, and then they create other openings, and then gradually you start to see progression. The most important thing is to understand that the state that I am in today does not have to be one where I hate on myself. You're a good person. A good person can always be better, right? As opposed to saying, I'm the worst of the worst right now, and there's nothing good within me. Do you know what I mean? So you bring that positive motivation and intention, and you can see like things that you couldn't even imagine, and then you start to ask these questions that are like, wow, like this wasn't as tough as I thought it would be, and it bears then the fruits that can only be yielded through the actions in and of itself. You get what I'm saying? Okay, so for next week, like honor the timings of the prayer, the hurmat waqt. Look at what the Quran and the Hadith say about like prayer itself, salah. Read through the rest of this chapter. You know, we'll start to go through it a little bit more quickly. And think about like where are the places of stillness for you. where do you go? What are some of the things that get in the way for the focus to kind of build itself up, right? A big thing is going to be just organic absence of focus. Like most of our day is spent doing things unfocused, and it's like a deliberate thing you can build as an exercise, building attentiveness, building focus. If you've had years where you've lived unfocused as a default, and then the opposite of focus is just temporary and like very minute in comparison, like why wouldn't it be hard? Why wouldn't it be hard, right? So you start to think what's coming up, and then we'll pick up from there, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Nice to meet you.